And to kick us off with our opening keynote, we have Darren Yong, the Head of Technology for Media and Telecommunications at KPMG Asia Pacific. And now Darren's topic is one that I'm sure that is an issue for many of you, resetting your digitalization journey without disruption. So we also have some questions for everybody that we'll refer to during the course of Darren's discussion. So the question should have popped up on your screen there. If we could start to cast our votes, we'll revisit the responses during Darren's presentation. So the question: approximately how far down your current phase of digital transformation are you? 0 to 20%, just getting started. 21 to 40%, we have some traction, but still a way to go. 41 to 60%, making good progress. 61 to 80%, starting to think about the next phase. And then the last one, 81 to 100%, almost done with this phase and about to start the next. So I'll be interested to see how many of you have that response. Anyway, without further ado from me, I'm going to hand over for our opening keynote to Darren Yong from KPMG. Darren.
Thank you, Lachlan, for that. Hope everyone is well today. Really excited to be here today, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this session here hosted by CDOTrends. I wanted to start off by sharing with you sort of the situation that we have today, and hopefully today's session we will be able to have a bit of a dialogue around resetting your digitalization strategy without disruption. I wanted to share the themes we're seeing today, some great examples, and really connect with you all personally to see how that we can help shape that future, give you some ideas, and really help you on your digitalization journey. Lachlan talked around about being digital native, and I think all of us who are not digital native are striving to be more of that type of a company. I understand you just took the poll, so it'd be great to see what those poll results were before we start this presentation. So if you're able to show up the results on the screen, I'd just be curious to see what everyone had responded to. Interesting. So that's great to see. We're seeing the middle making good progress for all of you in this audience. We have a few who've just getting started. We have about 20 to 40%. There's still some way to go. And some of you are sort of leading the pack there with starting to think around the next phase. So as we think around digital transformation, we know that this is a continual journey. We know that as we look to how do we move forward, there are going to be continuous steps, continual pivots. And just as COVID has shown us, this is a situation where we're needing to rethink what we need to do next. So today, what I wanted to do was talk through that and share with you some insights around how do we better move forward in our digital transformation journey. So how has this world changed? I think in the last few years, you've seen some really profound impact of where we are today. I've got two numbers for you, 10 years and 8 months. Does anyone know what that means? Well, the number's both obvious and yet a reminder of the significance of how fast things can change. You can see obviously from the graph here that you've heard this narrative a lot around how fast digital has evolved, but this graphic really just brings to bear how much the last few months has really made a big difference to us. And so for all of us, that makes a big difference in how we think. Living in Singapore, if I reflect on QR codes that were on bus stops, I'm not sure about you, but I wasn't really the type of person that would go around snapping QR codes and try and get promotions. But now with COVID, everyone has been using QR codes. That friction to QR codes has dramatically changed. It actually has become part of our everyday living. Everywhere we go, we need to scan a code. So because of that behavior shift, customer engagement has changed. So for us, if we think around all those things that have happened in the last 8 months, the QR codes, the Zoom events that we're having, how has that changed and rewired our acceptance to be less frictionless about using technology? These are things that we can start to reconsider and input into our customer journey maps. Research has shown that habits change in 3 to 6 months. So that's absolutely a key thing for us to see, given the fact that we're in COVID for coming up to almost 1.5 years now. The world has changed, and where are we now? I guess it's no surprise of you from this graph here what's been sold. the toilet roll effect has certainly changed. What's stocked are being shelved. And as consumer brands, there's a big shift in how we engage. Restaurants are going online. The number of startups with prepackaged alcohol has gone through the roof. And while we sort of see this as a day-to-day change in the way we live, I think it has broader impacts as to the significance of how we pivot and proof that a digital native company is what we need to be in order to be more receptive to the day-by-day changes and the requests of our customers. And when you see this quote, can you see my screen? I think we can all laugh about that joke, and we've heard that a number of times, but if you think a bit deeper around that, and the video communication adoption will stay, and the impact that that has, if you think around education, health, fitness, seeing doctors, the familiarity of now using Zoom and the interaction and customer engagement has absolutely changed. And again, to the point being, how do we incorporate these changes into how we engage with our end customers, be it B2C or B2B? We conducted a survey actually in May 2021 with CEOs around the world. And interestingly, we conducted the same survey a year earlier, just when COVID was hitting. But this survey shows the results of what over a few thousand CEOs responded around the world. And quite interestingly, these may resonate with you or your leaders. But interestingly, number one, around onboarding new digital technology and customer experience was key. To develop disruptive technologies that can improve operating models, to increase market share. And actually for me, the important one was around evolution of business models to grow faster than organic growth. I think we're all familiar with the new startups who are emerging, the massive tech companies who are now moving across multiple sectors, really engaging with us more. And I think that is something for us to all consider as we look at how do we play and operate with our customers across sectors. So I wanted to share a bit more detail around what, as digital leaders, could be reassessing. And these are 4 broad themes that I just want to talk through. And that links to sort of some examples that we'll share a bit later on in this presentation today. So we've seen the message around adapted customer journey. You've seen how adoption of QR codes and digital engagement, how has that engagement or shift changed the way that you're engaging going forward in your current digital transformation? What areas are there that you could better adopt to drive better customer engagement, now knowing that there are certain lower friction points in digital? What are those low friction points? Because we know velocity and low friction is absolutely key in a way of delivering real-time and effective customer engagement. Digital accelerators, we're seeing a lot of this across the businesses that I'm working around. Growth hacks, we're all striving to growth, and particularly all of us in Asia, trying to get to those billion populations across our regions. These new digital natives are taking an even stronger position, moving broader across other sectors, and that's really driving all of the traditional multinational organizations to really think hard around how do I become more relevant? How do I become more instant in the way I engage? And how do I accelerate using various engagement models to do that? So I'll share some ideas later on in this presentation. The home workspace, I think all of us are all at home, most of us working at home. And I think if you ask ourselves a few years ago, that wasn't so strong. But now, many of us don't even want to go back to the office. You've seen many companies state that there's an environment where you can work from home. So what does that actually mean in terms of the B2B environment and the B2C environment? Well, what it means is merging in the home. There's a race to the home. If you think around the big tech companies trying to get in with speakers, IoT devices, automation, and now with everything being delivered to the home, there is a far different environment in the way the home is. And so I think that's a critical example around the way that the people at home are interacting. I've never seen so many packages come through my front door in the last couple of months, and I'm sure you've all experienced very similar situations there. Emerging tech. You've all seen the rise of crypto, the ups and falls, NFTs, digital media, blockchain, and 5G and IoT. All of this will drive huge, huge volumes of data. If you're not ready to be able to process and monetize that using AI, ML, big data, democratized data models, real-time business models where you can create new products and services and interactions by the day, let alone not by the month or by the year, this is where the emerging tech starts to play. And if your platforms aren't ready, your front office is not ready to engage the middle and back office, that's where we'll see the biggest difference in organizations that are going to be able to continue to evolve versus those ones that may lag a bit behind. So what are we seeing in the market? I'd like to share some examples in the market and targeting this audience today. These broad examples link back to the concepts that I've just touched on. And I'd like to cover a few trends that we can also see that may impact you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts along the way. And perhaps at the end, when we have another question, just get your sense around where do you see this and how relevant this is to you. So the first example I want to talk through is around the concept around consumer hyperlocalization. And this doesn't just apply for banking and insurance, it applies for every sector. I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but all the big banks are targeting the future wealth in Asia. We all know where all the billionaires are and where they're coming from. And banks, insurers, everyone are trying to target more effectively high net worth individuals in Asia. Relationship managers, thousands of them being hired across the region. And the thinking is around getting to know these people more, engaging with them more. But what we've been looking at is, do these people operate differently? How do they think differently? And how do they act differently? Is it safe to assume that the high net worth individual in the US is the same as the high net worth individual in Asia? So what we've been looking at is basically preferences. And if you can see these base preferences, these are common things that I think many of you would relate to when it comes to making a decision. Do I need research advice? Do I rely on advisors? Am I tech savvy? And what's my risk appetite? So these are what we will call base factors. I think when you look at around the world, you could probably apply a pretty broad brush approach to that. However, what we've now looked at is areas called hyperfactors. And what hyperfactors are in a nutshell are the hyperlocalization of areas such as personal interest and value and ecosystem preferences. So for example, if I draw the attention to China and WeChat, the search, the social media, the e-commerce, are they using Facebook versus personal value? What's important to individuals? And what's interesting? And if you think around Asia, and many of you have probably lived here for a long time, you know, I think when you come to Asia for the first time and people comment, the first things they'll comment are things like, wow, the service is amazing. The restaurants are great. The hotel, the service you get from there. And this all leads back to this very hyper-serviced world. Now, if you think of that for a moment and you think about engaging these individuals, each of these individuals have different ecosystems. They might be using Line and Kakao versus WeChat or WhatsApp. They might be using different e-commerce platforms. They may not be on Amazon. They may be on Lazada. And they might have different trends and appetite to taking new technology, crypto, banking, products, services, and the experience around their personal preferences. So by understanding subcategories of hyperfactors by groups, you're able to better target them with digital technologies and engaging them on platforms that are relevant to them at the right point in time. The next example I wanted to talk through was sector convergence and data democratization. So we're already seeing this take place with big tech companies. You know, as you know, tech companies are not just tech companies, there are consumer brands. They're operating in finance and payments, delivery services, transportation. But I want to share with you how we're seeing tech and telco in the center pivot into other sectors. And actually, if you put your sector in the middle, ask yourself, what other sectors are you now looking at? Telco banking, payments. I'm working with telecom companies who are now entering into the banking space. We've seen this pay now, pay later model emerge. And as you start to race for the customer engagement, the ways of able to bank differently and drive payments differently is a key differentiator now to run new revenue models and for telcos to act like tech companies. Insurance, we're seeing telcos move into insurance and tech companies move into insurance, and vice versa, insurance companies partner with telcos and tech companies. So this starts to change the way that you interact with the customer and really try and drive new insurance products. Be it, as you see, like I'm driving in Grab and I get an insurance product on my Grab app. Health is a big topic now. Data, home consultations. How do hospitals and health and insurance and prescriptions all start to link? And I think many years ago, you've seen how Amazon's trying to get into the space as well. I'm not sure if you know, but telco and tech are one of the biggest users of energy around the world. I think in a recent publication in Singapore, they said all the data centers in Singapore contributed to 7% of the entire national power grid. In Australia, the big telcos there contribute around 4%, the single buyer of energy. And with data going up and cooling needs going up, that CO2 emission is not going to be a good story for the telco. So they're looking at renewable energy sources, perhaps actually being an energy company delivering solar panels and energies to the home. And if you think around that business model, it's probably more to a telco model than to a metering company. The home I've mentioned already, but that home, getting into the home using technology and packaging is something I'll talk about on the next slide. But certainly there's huge different opportunities in trying to get into smart home environments, let alone smart city, smart infrastructure. And you think around all the data and platforms that run across all these areas, you're going to need a democratized data platform and a very agile monetization model. And last but not least, platform. We've seen what platform is doing, buy-sell platforms, media platforms, telecom companies and tech companies taking on this space. So from your perspective, whatever sector you're in, there is an upside to basically respond to how companies such as Amazon are moving. And in this space, we're seeing the same with Tencent. Jio, where Facebook has invested in Jio in India, the telco there. And if you think around how that business model impacts you to reset and rethink where you need to be, that's what I would like to sort of leave you with some thoughts and ideas around, and hopefully inspire you to think differently around how you as a CDO can leverage different business models. So here's an example of how that all comes to life in the home. And you know that every single telco today just sells you your broadband and your connectivity. But what if they offered real-time home insurance? What does that mean? Well, simply put, package service, smart lock, video camera, and can monitor who's in the home. So if it could tell you that someone was physically in the home 300 of the 360 days a year, what does that do to insurance premium on the threat of robbery? So how does that impact your home premium? So here are examples where data applied with a telco and an insurance product can provide the home with a digital solution managed by a telco and include insurance that also provides you lower premiums. This also is moving into things like health, activity-based. You've all seen this with Apple, but smartwatch, digital scales, blood pressure devices, if measured daily and shared and managed, does that reduce my health premiums? So how does that adjacency work in areas that you're seeing? And I think this is just an example of where we're seeing a number of telcos in the region launch insurance brands and look at real new health products, packaging services, because they want to be more of a service operator and engagement with the future consumer in the home. And this ties back to many of the topics I've just touched on. The race to the consumer is another big topic, and I know all of you are very interested in basically accelerating customer acquisition and new channels to market. But these are just some examples. And now you're seeing people buy and sell through Instagram, Facebook, Telegram, TikTok engagement, using platforms and suppliers. So those channels are exploding. And you know, when you talk about omni-channel, it is getting very, very complicated. And if your engagement model and your marketing model and your consumer adoption model is not clear, this can be a lot of noise for all of you. But where do you target those channels? Home, payments, ecosystems, new products, new channels. This is the area that I think needs to be very better focused and redefined in the way you work. And if you look at what's happening now with brands like TikTok, what we're seeing is that obviously launching a new product. And if you look at this little example, this banking example, 873 million video views, 943,000 videos submitted, and 11% ad recall. These hashtag campaigns are used for, in some ways, comedy relief, which we all need, I think, during this time, but launch of new products and getting the millennials engaged in your brand. We're seeing this with brands like Nike and Dettol, consumer brands. But in fact, in every area we're looking at, we're even looking at running a 5G campaign on explaining what 5G is across telcos around the world. So how can CDOs, at CDOs, can we reset an agile way? At this point, I'd like to launch a quick poll. So if we can have the poll question up, around this. And what this really does is sort of tie back to the topics that were raised earlier. So the question I'd like to ask all of you is, in my organization has a strategy to place and look at revenues and models across different sectors. So my question is, do you agree? Do we disagree, partially agree, or strongly agree, or unsure about this? And I'm curious to see what the response is, because digital natives are absolutely doing this day to day, minute by minute. But I'd be curious just to see what this audience says. So if you don't mind just answering this quickly. So if I disagree with that, my organization has a strategy in place to look at revenues across other sectors to drive revenue streams. Partially agree, we're open and investigating, but nothing formal in place. We agree, we have a formal conversation and we're starting to investigate this, but yet to implement at scale. Strongly agree, this is part of our strategy and actively executing on this defined with budget, and also unsure. I think we need to look into this more as a business. So please submit your answers now. And I'd be curious, I think all of you, to see what each of you all responded to this question. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. And then we'll just publish the results. So when you have the chance, we'll just publish the results and have a look at what everyone said. Wow, that's interesting. So not many of you disagree at all, which was quite interesting, actually. Partially agree. Interestingly, many of you agreed. Some of you strongly agree. That's really good to see. And some of you are unsure. So if I look at the bulk, it's in the middle. And I think just if you look back and you look at your competition and who may have answered what, it might give you a bit of a thinking point around how you should be thinking around these future monetization models. Great, so I'll just close that and I'll move on. So, so how as CDOs can we reset in an agile way? Well, the first thing is reviewing your customer journey for all your key stakeholders. Each of you are responsible for designing customer journeys and digital customer journeys. What we're seeing is that basically the data sources on the left to impact the person in the middle is exploding. And these could be tens, hundreds of data sources that in a democratized world could bring value for the person in the middle. What's critical that we're now seeing is that rather than have 1,000 use cases, it's better just to have 10 that do something effectively. So the user value on the right for the persona in the middle with the data source on the left is absolutely critical in how to better design and architect what you are actually looking for. And I think the CDO's role is becoming more and more business and tech orientated to focus on particular areas. And so if you know your use case is driving customer retention or revenue or saving costs or running or improving compliance or around governance and reporting, you have a better chance of that use case being scalable, measurable, and providing real ROI. The next thing I want to highlight for you all was your use case pipeline and your tech stack. If you take a look at the 3 pillars, ask yourself, how many use cases are you running on your data platforms? If you had full data democratization, what would this look like for you? Would you have the same number of boxes? Would you have 5, 10 use cases in each box? How many layers deep would these use cases be? Do you have a program to manage these 3 pillars? Do you have a process to manage value? Do you have a standard to know how do I drive this as a stage digital transformation? And if you think about this sheet as layers, the way I try to explain it to my clients is saying, if you had 1 layer, that could be your phase 1 of your digital transformation. If you had 10 layers, that could be the evolution of your digital transformation. And the continuous journey of inputting more data onto data platforms on the bottom, the use cases, the analytics, the future IT roadmap, all ties back to the persona, the buyer, and your staged development and engagement of your use case pipeline. So I want to share that with you because I felt that, you know, as we engage with clients, they often don't know where to start. How do I make sense of all these use cases, or how do I build a platform that delivers that can enable these use cases? And I think there's a strong interlock between the need to create and democratize your whole network versus perhaps just part of it to solve 1 or 10 problems at a time. So breaking it down into manageable pieces would be the message, and integrating what we've seen today into and revisiting your approach will be absolutely important going forward. So if I think about resetting your digital journey in a hyper-localized world, there are a few things that we'd like to touch on. The persona. So revisit that front office persona. Understand who that person is. Ecosystem mapping. What does that future ecosystem look like? What are the new disruptors in that space that you need to consider? Speed of which use case and MVP builds, prove it. And then finally integrate it, your middle and back office transformation. And I think there's a bit of front to back and back to front conversation in every digital transformation journey that we're having. So this is absolutely critical. And we're seeing often in the past, very back office led transformations. And I think now what we're seeing more is a front office led transformation that ties intimately back to the back office, and working together is absolutely critical. So in conclusion, I'd like to leave with you all with some key messages and takeaways. I don't think any of these are necessarily groundbreaking, but I hope that these link back to the future, the rest of the next day in terms of presentations. First point is around customer first, hyperlocal. The landscape has changed, and the point around being hyperlocal and the way you engage is really important. We know that markets in Indonesia, India, Vietnam, Hong Kong, China, Australia, Singapore, they're all different. And you know what? If you're not going hyperlocal, your competition is. How do you get the 80-20 rule right, where you're not hyperlocalizing to a point where you need to build a system for every country? So the trick is getting that platform right and the hyperlocalization and the processes right to enable that. Number 2 is business alignment, be hyper engaged. the business is going to lead the transformation, and many of the business don't quite understand tech. What we're seeing is talking tech jargon doesn't help. And so the business side and tech often don't understand the business. So what we try to do is bridge those two worlds together in words that make sense and drive outcome. The use case pipeline, the persona build, who am I targeting, is really, really critical. And last but not least, technology and people agility. We need to be hyper aware. We need to be hyper aware of what technology is out there and what's happening, the new emerging tech, how to integrate. We need to be hyper aware of how others are using that. We need to be hyper aware of our people, because without our people, we cannot do 1 and 2 and transform. So working hand in hand with the business, redesigning your technology architecture, that is the digital first culture that we need. And so we're seeing overlaps between people, culture, transformation, and business and customer all merging into one. So I hope that really helped you all think around what you could be doing differently to reset your digital transformation journey. And I hope that also gave and linked insights to the rest of our speakers today. And I'd like to thank again CDOTrends and for all of you for taking the time to listen. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Darren. That's really setting the context for the rest of the day. I notice on the chat, the panelists from the next session are getting quite interested and quite excited about some of the things that you're saying. So we're interested in following on from there. Can I just remind everybody that the chat room is open now for questions? Please do post your questions in there, and we'll take them there and present them to the speakers as we go. And if you want to win the door prize, the lucky door prize today, you need to have asked a question. So there's a bit of a motivation there. But Darren, can I just ask you one question before we move on to the panel? I was interested in the question that you asked to everybody about thinking about new revenues. And I think it was interesting that 65% of the people either strongly agreed or agreed that their organizations had been thinking about additional revenues. I'm just interested, what are the implications of that digitally? Does it mean an interrogation of the business model? Does it mean that they need to think about the cloud? What does that accelerate in terms of technology once they make that commitment to thinking about new revenues?
It is so much there, Lachlan. I mean, the main thing is that I would say the number one thing is the business. So which sector do you want to go into? So which converged sector makes sense for you? Number two is I would really look at the monetization, because we see that just democratizing data isn't helpful, but the monetization model. And then when you start to dig deeper, it moves into a lot of areas around regulation, data sovereignty, security, privacy. And so in this world of data democratization, cross-country, cross-sector, that complication is really exploded. So if I draw that all down to the basics, if you're not digital native in the way you operate within your organization, it's going to be very hard to combine another sector. Yep. So step one is getting it right for yourself and that framework and approach, and then start to investigate where to move towards. But I think if you just saw that Amazon example and you've just seen them with MGM buying a media company, and it just, the continuation of this is just at speed. So it's fascinating. I love the ideas I'm seeing. I continue to be inspired and hearing from the network. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting topic, Lachlan. And you know, I can't do it justice in this period of time, but I'd love to engage more with you and the teams if I could help more.
I know in our world, in journalism, we always talk about, digital leaders and laggards, and that's been something that we've talked about for a long time. I'm interested in knowing, to what extent has the pandemic and the changes that it's brought, has that reordered our understanding of who the leaders and the laggards are?
I would say, I think there's opportunity for all of us. I think from a macro point of view, you can see the double down coming from all the multis. I mean, even speaking to big oil and gas companies, interestingly, who've gone through massive shift. When I asked them, what does your agenda look like? They said, number one is not changing, is digital. So I think the context of digital has just, as you know, put more emphasis on it. I think it's the how and way and the culture. Because if you're not sure how to use digital effectively and speak the lingo from a business context more so now, I think that will start to create the laggard effect. Mm-hmm. So I think what we're seeing is that leaders at board level, diversity, outside-in thinkers, cross-gender, cross-sector, cross everything you want to look at, is driving the need to actually have diversity, because you need different ideas. And the last thing I leave with is linear thinkers of the past, I think are going to be less relevant than lateral thinkers of the future, problem solvers, because you don't know all the use cases are going to be in the next year, let alone the next week. And so if you can't think laterally, the business isn't wired to think laterally and think that way, you're going to struggle, because we come from typically very systematic organizations where you just follow that for the next year, execute every quarter. This is a very different model, and the type of people required to move and pivot will help you be those leaders versus the laggards.
Excellent, thank you. We do have a couple of questions, but maybe I'll ask my colleague Winston to throw them into the panel that's coming up. So Darren, thanks so much for your presentation today. That's a great scene setter, and thanks for presenting that.